Ireland had a well-earned Six Nations break over the weekend, but the Grand Slam bid ramps up again this week with Warren Gatland and his Wales squad coming to the Aviva Stadium this Saturday. We will be discussing that game and plenty more on the latest episode of the Left Wing podcast. Will Slattery here with you. I'm delighted to be joined in studio by Luke Fitzgerald and on the line by Jonathan Bradley. And Jonathan, great to have you back on the show as always. I don't think we've had you on since before the tournament started. I think it was our big preview where we discussed the Six Nations to come. Obviously, things have changed pretty dramatically over the first 2 weeks. Ireland went from maybe dreaming of a Grand Slam to probably expecting one at this stage. You know, what would you rate the tournament out of 10 from an Irish perspective? Like, are you deducting any marks?
I don't think you can, really. I mean, the only sort of downside to Ireland's tournament over the past 2 weeks has been something entirely out of their control, in the sense that Hugo Keenan's injured, and you can, even if you like, put a positive spin on that, because finding a backup to Hugo Keenan is probably something that was on a list of Irish ambitions that maybe they hadn't really got to over the last couple of years. You could probably make the argument that if Jimmy O'Brien was fit, it was going to be Jimmy O'Brien. But I think there's a real opportunity now, in the absence of Hugo Keenan, as much as they'll miss him, to go down that depth chart and try and establish some form of backup. So really, I think when you look at the way that defence has improved from what we've seen in the World Cup, the way the set piece has come on from what we've seen in the World Cup, the way that Jack Crowley has played, filling what the biggest pair of boots in Irish rugby, the emergence of Joe McCarthy, like, it's hard to say it's been anything but a perfect 2 weeks for Ireland. Like, the Six Nations as a whole is another matter, but from an Irish perspective, I don't think you could have even dreamed of it going any better.
Yeah, it's funny because obviously I think my first question, Luke, to you last week was, would anything other than a Grand Slam be a pretty major disappointment at this stage? And I saw one or two of the comments under our YouTube video kind of saying, oh, that's getting ahead of ourselves. But like, as Jonathan outlines there, like the way the team have been playing, especially in relation to the people left on their fixture list, like, it has been an ideal 2 weeks. The injuries, as Jonathan mentioned, offers, without sounding like Andy Farland, the opportunities and the adversity, it does offer good opportunities to try out a guy at 15 this coming Saturday, most likely, and potentially Kieran Frawley, to see who could step up in Hugo Keenan's absence. But in the round, it's been as good a 2 weeks as you could have asked her.
Yeah, I think it is. I would say maybe the only thing that still is outstanding is probably just figuring out that scrum issue that they're having. I kind of refuse to believe it's a personnel thing. I just think, because I just think they're brilliant players, all of them, particularly the front three, probably front four, including Bealham, really, really top class players. Five, if you include Juice Keller. I'm going to continue on and on here. But I think you get the point. That's the one kind of outstanding issue that I'd like to see them kind of box off, particularly before, the South Africa matches. I think that'll be obviously a key issue in those games. But overall, really, really good. And I agree with Jonathan. I think that Keenan going down at this juncture is actually a real positive, because I think you want to probably have him back for England. I still think that's a sticky fixture. I don't like going to Twickenham. I still think it's a really difficult place to go. I mean, Ireland have had some success of late over there. But I just feel like that'll be a really difficult one. And I can see that being a one-score game, even though they're not playing great. I just feel like defensively and discipline-wise, if they get those two things right, it'll just be difficult to beat over there. And they could cause us problems at scrum and line-out. They're pretty decent in both of those facets. So by no means a foregone conclusion, but I think the expectation based on Ireland's performances, but also on their ability and where they are from a coaching staff point of view, game plan point of view, they should go on and win the Grand Slam. But still a tough one over in Twickenham. I'm worried about that one.
Yeah, well, still 3 games to go, obviously.
Yeah. But look, I just think they'll have too much for Wales, too much for Scotland.
Well, it's not our job, or it's certainly not my job to invent reasons that I think they're not going to win when I do. You know what I mean? Like,
cautious optimism is always the safest route, but I think you're right. We should expect them to do it. Yeah. I think they will expect to do it themselves. But look, just traditionally speaking,
I said the same thing before the All Blacks game in the World Cup as well. I was like, it's my job to invent reasons why I think that, and then they didn't.
Well, sorry, that was probably a different kettle of fish. I mean, you'd expect them. Let's not go down that avenue. But I just think that one in Twickenham is a difficult place to go, no matter who you are. So I'd expect that one to be challenging.
Yeah, there's a full back issue, Jonathan. Like last week, we had a discussion about who might fill the void, and we were kind of going into loads of different options. Now it looks to have been narrowed down to Kieran Frawley most likely starting in the event of Hugo Keenan being ruled out, which is expected, albeit not confirmed at this stage. You know, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think, does he have the calibre to play international rugby at 15? Is it just a 1 week stopgap in your opinion? Like, how are you kind of approaching that part of it?
Yeah, I wouldn't describe it as a stopgap necessarily. I think it's a good test for him. Like, you know, Ireland are 22-point favourites, so it's a good test, but a qualified one in the sense that he's not being expected to come in and reinvent the wheel. I don't think anybody expects him to be anywhere really close to the level that Hugo Keenan is, because Hugo Keenan has been just an unerringly consistent performer for Ireland over the last couple of years. Like, you even think back to, you know, the early tackle that he made against France, the tap and go in the build up to the first try against Italy. Like, he's been an almost understated tone setter in the game so far, and he's a massive, massive player. But I don't think Andy Farrell will ask him to mimic the contribution that Hugo Keenan makes. And he's a different player as well. One thing that'll be interesting, obviously, with, you know, his versatility and his experience of playing 10, his experience of playing 12, is whether you use him more as, you know, that second playmaker type. And it's not that Hugo Keenan isn't creative, but I think just the ability to show Wales something different there is going to be something that's really interesting to watch, just utilising for all these different skill set, I guess. But, you know, Hugo Keenan, I think, is maybe further away than the next best player in his position than any player in the Ireland 23. I think that's a fair enough statement to make.
Maybe Gibson Park. Maybe. I agree. Yeah,
so, like, you know, if we're not so much talking about replacing him, we're just talking about, I suppose, filling a different role. And I think it is going to be interesting to see, just in terms of coming into the line that little bit more. You know, he maybe doesn't have huge amounts of gas. He won't cover the same amount of ground in the backfield as Keenan, but there will be a different element there in attack that I think will be interesting to watch.
Yeah, it's probably about creating additional options, especially with, you know, a few injuries. Jimmy O'Brien, like with a neck injury, who knows? Because obviously there's 2 matches against South Africa in the summer where fullback will be a vital position in terms of how they play the game. So, you know, who's to say Mark Hansen, Jimmy O'Brien are available in the summer? So this person, if it is Kieran Frawley, could get another opportunity if you know, they need to kind of go that way in the summer. Just to speak about Hugo Keenan again before we go to Kieran Frawley and your thoughts on him playing at fullback. Like, he has been an outstanding success story of the Andy Farrell era. Like a guy kind of like Gibson Park, who, you know, while playing for Leinster pretty regularly, it was almost like the fate Andy Farrell showed in him at international level that just saw his game just really develop at a really accelerated rate. Like, what does he do at full back that's just been so vital that Andy Farrell, of all the players, has really resisted even kind of experimenting there?
I think it's actually his ball handling. I would kind of go further than Jonathan. I think that Frawley is being considered in that position because he's the most like for like with him now. Keenan obviously does have he probably doesn't have the passing quality of like a 10 that, say, Frawley would have. He probably has a different type whereby he can do it at pace. I think it might be an even harder skill. He can do it at real pace. And because he's got that top end pace and footwork, you really, really have to respect him, which is what I think will make it harder for Frawley. But Frawley might have a bigger array of passing. And he'll certainly be probably looking for a pass first versus probably, even though Keenan has a real strength of passing, he's probably looking for a run first option most of the time. It's a real strength for him as well. But I think it's the passing. I think Ireland have lacked that for a very, very long period of time. It used to be a tough place playing on the wing. You'd have to go you'd be looking for more options off 10 than looking for options out there. Would traditionally be my view, unless kind of Zebo was playing. So Keenan does open that up for you. It causes more problems for defences. I think he's a key reason, aside from Ireland's development in their front eight in terms of their passing game. I think Keenan has been the real key for them, because I'm not sure that Henshaw and Ringrose, who've been in the centres, are pass first players. I think they're really physical, great footwork kind of guys that get you gain line. But I think Keenan has been the key part to really opening up opening up the total pitch and making Ireland way, way harder to defend against. So I think you can't overstate how important he is to Ireland's game. I think there's a reason he continuously gets picked. I think it's because of that. I think also his fitness levels are off the charts. He covers so much ground back there, and he seems to be the kind of guy, kind of similar to a Bowden Barrett. I think you've heard me talk about Bowden Barrett. I always find it weird how he always seems to be in those long passages of play where the ball's in play for ages. Seems to be the guy that makes the key play, whether it's stopping a try or getting a try, or Keenan has that kind of feel for me in terms of his fitness as well. So. Key guy for Ireland, definitely some key man risk there, if you like. Yeah. And I do think it's important that they do develop other options there. Jimmy O'Brien seems the most obvious candidate. I thought he was brilliant in the World Cup the last time we saw him in an Irish jersey. So hopefully he gets back quickly. Zebo is right there for you, but for whatever reason doesn't fit the eye, and probably age profile at this stage and injury profile working against him maybe. But he's the most like for like, I think. And I think Frawley... I really like Frawley, but I think he's a 10. I've always said this in international. I think he'll struggle with the top end, with the physicality of being a top end 15. You've got to be a serious athlete back there. You've got to be really strong, really quick and really fit. And you've got to have a real feel for the game, allied with all those physical characteristics. He'll have the feel for the game, but I think from a physical attribute standpoint, I think he's slightly off that. I think he's more in the mold of that 10, 12, leaning towards 10. I'm not even sure he could make it at 12 over a long period of time in international rugby. I just think there is a specific build for each position in rugby, generally speaking, and I think you've got to specialise. You've heard me say this about forever. Yeah.
Well, as you said, it's kind of like this weekend with the view to that England game is where the intrigue comes in, because as Jonathan mentioned, Ireland are mega favourites, that they should be able to negotiate this weekend regardless of who's playing 15. Yeah. But the way I touched on last week, the way Freddie Stewart is playing in the air, like if Kieran Frawley is a full back, he's capable in the air, but Hugo Keenan is really rock solid there. Yeah. And that could be an area that they go after whoever plays fullback in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, it would be what I'd target, certainly. Not that he's got...
That's how Borthwick wants to play the game. Yeah, so well, it's not like that he's that weak.
Well, sorry, every single international team will target this area. Yeah. Wales will target this 100% if it's Frawley. If it's low, I think less so. I think he's pretty strong on the air now. That's a strong part of his game, and he's got that cannon of a boot. Now, Frawley has a big boot as well. I think Lowe is the more obvious candidate. He's got the ball handling ability. He's got the physical attributes. He's used to playing in the backfield. He'll have a feel for the pace of international rugby back there as well. Frawley is clearly a high intellect rugby player. He can play loads of different positions. It requires you to be, a smart rugby player to do that. But international rugby is... you gotta specialise, honestly, to be a really top class player. I think that's a survival play versus a flourishing kind of play. You know what I mean? I think Lowe could flourish there, but I just can't see it for Frawley. I hope I'm wrong.
But it's not as if he can't be like the Leo Cullen. I'm only a 10.
No, but he should leave. He should have left Leinster.
Yeah,
100%. He should have left Leinster.
Yeah, fair enough. But that's not to say because he can play every other position. There is a temptation to be used like that. No matter where.
Shouldn't be for him.
But no matter where he's playing. Is there anywhere you can go where you're like?
What happened to him last week, Will? That is exactly what happened to him last week. Not getting selected for the Italian game is exactly what I'm talking about. That had to hurt. That had to hurt. He was in the squad against France, but doesn't fit the bill because he doesn't specialise in a position for the Italy game, when you're looking for a proper replacement. And he'll never be in the team week on week because he doesn't play a specific position for Leinster. And that's going to be... I've called this from a long way out.
To be fair, hard to argue with that. Jonathan, is there anything kind of other talking points ahead of the weekend that is intriguing you? Obviously, you mentioned the kind of the favouritism of Ireland. Wales named their team today. Going through the team sheet, like... Warren Gatland is really operating with a substandard squad to what he would have had when he was here, 5-6 years ago. Well,
even last year, the team last year was on its last legs, obviously. But you look at the experience of that team, and I was writing a wee bit about this today. So, I've got the numbers to hand. The team that Wales fielded against Ireland in this championship last year had 952 caps. The team that Warren Gatland named today for Saturday has 499. That's almost half the caps gone.
Most of those are George North as well, or a huge chunk of those.
119 of those are from George North.
Yeah.
So, when you look at the team that opened the Six Nations last year, if you're a casual rugby fan who tunes in for the Six Nations, whenever this game starts on Saturday and they're panning down the line of the Wales team, if you're a casual rugby fan, you're not going to know who these guys are. But equally, and you can almost make the argument that this is another incredible job by Warren Gatland, he's come in, he's cleaned house, he's made comments in the press that have sort of intimated that this shouldn't be being done now, but it wasn't done under Wayne Pivac, and he's sort of having to carry the can for the work that wasn't done in the 3 years that he wasn't there. And expectations have lowered to the point, rightly or wrongly, that Wales have lost 2 games to open the Six Nations. And they're probably the team that is being talked about most positively outside of Ireland in the whole competition because of how they've stayed in games, how they almost came back against Scotland, the way they hung in the fight against England at Twickenham. And there's almost a feel-good factor around Welsh rugby that hasn't, certainly wasn't there this time last year whenever we were talking about strike action. So I think, whenever you see that team sheet that Wales put out this afternoon, it really brings home just how Wales have had to clean house in the last 12 months. It's I actually don't really know if I can recall seeing anything like it. Maybe you could go back to Ireland in 2000, bringing all those young guys in, but this to me even seems more dramatic than that. It's incredible when you go down the team sheet and you take out the likes of George North just to see the lack of experience. And we're not even so much talking about guys that are inexperienced at international level, like the sort of cadre of Cardiff players that have come through in this championship aren't even experienced at regional level. They haven't got that many URC games behind them, but here they are playing test rugby, sink or swim sort of stuff. But to my mind, over the 2 games, even though they have lost them, there's a number of guys there that have given a good account of themselves as well.
Yeah, I actually agree with Jonathan. They've lost, I think, the 2 games by a combined 3 points. If you looked at just the team sheets for both of those fixtures, you would have expected Wales probably to get hosed in both of them. And I know they were 27-0 down to Scotland, so it looked like it was going that way, and they fought back, bravely in the second half. But as Jonathan says, they had double the amount of caps last year's Six Nations, but they were brutal in last year's Six Nations. So I think Warren Gatland was clever, or it's necessity as well, but you're going to have a lot more leeway if you're playing all these young guys who are very inexperienced and losing if it's close versus playing with the established guys if they're at the end of the line anyway and you're not going to get the result. You might as well look to the next generation, or at least try to discover if the next generation can be anywhere near as good as what he had in his first tenure.
Yeah, and look, you think he's been forced into, but it's also kind of a smart move as well, because he starts from such a low base. Really manages the expectations, and anything that he does, it's positive, even though it's 2 losses, are viewed more positively. So that's definitely what's transpired. I'd be a little bit worried though. I kind of feel like he's kind of worked some kind of miracles, or whatever happens when they come into Wales camp hasn't really matched up with what's happening in the regions. My real concern for them is they kind of go down the Scotland route, where they end up with kind of 2 decent regional teams in the kind of medium to long term. I just don't know if the model is really working there. It seems like there's a lot of unhappy parties. They've come back together now. It seems to be settled down, but I just can't see it lasting. I think they've kind of paid the price for what's happened at regional level. If you look at Ireland's consistency, I think, has really risen over the last 20 years with how solid a performance that the provinces have put in. With great attendance generally. Lots of kind of interest levels, lots of success. Maybe not as much as we think we'd like at times, but generally speaking, very consistently competing for top honours, in league and cup campaigns. So I think Ireland's consistency is really built on that. Of course, good structures at the top as well, but I'd worry about Wales. I think he's doing a good job to start the competition, but I think they could get beaten well here in the weekend, I think, and they should get beaten well.
Yeah, well, this is their toughest game by far so far. I think 4 teams has always seemed quite a lot for the talent in the Welsh club game.
Well, they have massive playing numbers, and they still kind of have this weird thing where some of the clubs, I think, still have bigger attendances than some of the regional teams. Is it Pontypridd and there's I think the Ospreys, wherever the Ospreys kind of sit, is a really contentious kind of setup. It sits between 2 real traditionally big teams. And it's never really caught on there. Even when they had the kind of Galacticos there was kind of poor enough attendance numbers. So it's a weird kind of setup there. You'd hope that they don't. They're pretty key. You hear some kind of rumblings always with them joining the English League. Yeah, I don't know if that'll actually help them at all.
Say if you look at the English League, for instance, when 3 teams it was sad to see 3 teams go away last year, but the quality across the board has improved as a result. Like, there's more quality concentrated in a smaller amount of teams. Like, 3 Welsh teams would strike you'd have 3 much more competitive teams rather than 4 teams that aren't doing very well. I feel like if they spread that talent over 3 teams, it might just work better for them.
Yeah, it might, but like, you're still reducing the possibility of, the availability of slots for people to play against good opposition as well. So you're already down, another 23 people that are playing consistently against a Leinster, a Munster, whoever, an Edinburgh, Glasgow, like kind of pretty good teams. And you see, it's worked reasonably well for Scotland, but they have to be pretty creative about how they kind of get players in and different things like that. You know, I think they seem to be in a better place. Scottish rugby, to my mind, is actually in a pretty decent place.
They have 2 clubs who are both very competitive.
They're both very competitive. Whereas I look at Wales and I'm thinking, God, like what's where do they go from here? Cardiff Cardiff and Newport are actually the only ones that are kind of really, I think, pretty consistently viable for whatever. Like, Scarlets was always a brilliant rugby region, but have kind of fallen off. And the Ospreys, had some success, but as I said, traditionally they kind of fall. They're on a bit of a fault line between 2 really good clubs that still get more better attendances than the Ospreys get. But I think Warren Gatland's got a really, really difficult job. I think, no better man to kind of galvanise a group and get everyone working in the same direction. But I just think there'll come a point where there's only so much you can do with the kind of talent they have. Now, I know the caps are pretty low. Probably, what is it? Is it 499? So whatever it is, 370, of caps amongst the other 22 on the team. Pretty low. But still, you'd expect to kind of recognise, or for there be a few more guys that you're going to go, okay, that guy's a serious international. You just don't see it there.
They're losing Rhys Allen before the tournament as well.
Not helpful.
One of your few marquee players. And to be fair, like Jonathan touched on, like going back to 2000 with Ireland, like Warren Gatland has backed youth in the past, and it's served them pretty well. Like, even Sam Warburton, Dan Lilly.
But he didn't really get the benefits of that Irishman. So the next guy in Wales might reap the benefits.
Yeah, exactly.
I think all those guys as well were like really well flagged through the system, both for Ireland and for Wales. Like, those guys all came in, and yes, they were young players, but they had big reputations, and they'd been sort of earmarked as the next generation for quite a while. And there probably isn't that sense with these players that are coming through now. And
like Ruddock had that little bit of success before he came in, won the Grand Slam. But I agree with you, Jonathan. I think it's a great point. You know what I mean? There's nothing really flagged there. He's going to be the guy who's really bringing these guys on from a really low base, isn't he?
Yeah. So like that then goes back to Luke's point about how are these players going to develop at the regions, and the best way for them to develop into those sort of test stars when they haven't necessarily, and I don't mean that to sound disrespectful, but when they haven't necessarily been earmarked as that coming through the system. Because you look at their under-20s, and really sort of every year they look to have a couple of players, but probably not enough coming through at that age level as well. So it's a huge job for Warren Gatland, but he does seem to be almost relishing the idea of starting again. And sort of, as you guys said, like, it's clever enough to have done so and to lower the expectations to the level that he has. But equally, I don't think he had any other choice. We haven't really talked about the selection policies and the ever-changing selection policies about how many caps you have to have. And, now we see guys born in Wales going to English clubs earlier and earlier and earlier, and they're never going to have the opportunity to earn the amount of caps. So I guess it's how they fix that problem moving forward as well. It's going to be a big question to answer.
Yeah, it's a daunting job he has in his hands, but a daunting task this weekend as well. I wanted to talk to both of you about Ireland's record at the Aviva Stadium. It's funny because like the atmosphere has been under the microscope, generally, but also recently. Like, I know Rory O'Connor, our colleague, was writing about it about 2 weeks ago before the Italy game. The atmosphere was, pretty sedate, as I'm sure most listeners have heard about, or if they were there, kind of experience. But going back 10 years from the start of 2014, Ireland's record is 50 wins out of 55 internationals in the Aviva Stadium. So they've kind of turned it into like the best home advantage in World Rugby. Like I know,
is it better than South Africa's?
Well, see, they don't play every game in the same stadium, so it's not exactly apples and apples. Like obviously, Eden Park, the All Blacks haven't lost there in the professional era, but they don't play every game there. If they did, they wouldn't have this unbeaten record. Like Ireland play every game in the Aviva, 50 wins out of 50, 1 draw and 4 defeats, going back over 10 years to the start of 2014. Like that is a phenomenal home record. Like you wouldn't kind of think of it like that, but.
Yeah, although I get it. Do you know, it's a big number, isn't it? Like it's a pretty impressive number, and when you say it there, it's like unbelievably impressive. Yeah. No, sorry, it's unbelievably impressive. But I kind of do know that Ireland are bloody hard to beat at home. Like I would say, for example, like South Africa hard. Like I would say they'll beat us at home, but I would say if they came here, we'd beat them too. Do you know that kind of way?
We have them. They haven't beaten us in the Aviva in over 10 years. So,
do you know what I mean? So like I'm not surprised by that stat. Yeah. So,
but it's just more so that people would say, because actually a listener posted this in as well. I don't recall his name, so apologies. But he said like Ireland have like the worst atmosphere and the best home record. Or something,
Although I would say in the
those
big
two
games,
things probably do go hand in hand, because people turn up expecting Ireland to win, and it's like it seems counterintuitive, but because people expect Ireland to win, they're almost not in the game from the off. They're almost waiting to be entertained. Like there's so many other factors, most of them, I suppose, down to ticket prices and things like that. But I do think because Ireland are so good, it hurts the atmosphere, because it's only whenever you get the sense that the crowd comes into it more when they feel like the team needs them. So like in the big games against South Africa or New Zealand or England, France last year, but that was sort of a weird one because there were so many French in the crowd that day. Like it's really only the big games where the atmosphere does sort of kick up a notch. And that's going back really through the entirety of the Joe Schmidt tenure now into Andy Farrell. But like as I said, there's an awful lot of reasons, and I know like Rory's written about a lot of them, and it's a very difficult thing to get right, I think, in general. But I do think that because there's just this almost weight of expectation that you're not going to a participatory event, you're going to watch something and be entertained by it rather than be a part of it, I think does contribute to a bad atmosphere.
I would say though, some of the New Zealand matches over the last 10 years where we're really competing with them, they're kind of tight matches. Some of those atmospheres, they're some of the best atmospheres I've ever been at in any sport I've ever been to. Now, I know someone will say, I've never been to like Celtic Park or, or Parkhead, sorry, I can't remember what it is, whatever, Celtic anyway.
Celtic Park.
Yeah, Celtic Park, sorry. I've never been there or some of those kind of magic places, but I've been to Old Trafford, and, I know that's renowned as, sorry, you're probably a Liverpool supporter, yeah, but, Anfield and that apparently is off the charts, like non-stop kind of thing. I know they've had some issues this year, but, some of those atmospheres in the Aviva are unbelievable. I found them definitely. I know as a player in 2013, that drawn match, I've never, that was one of the only times I've played in a stadium outside of the Millennium where I was like,
would have been a draw, actually.
Oh, my apologies.
If you went charge down the conversion prematurely, it actually would have been a draw.
One of my colleagues had to make a defensive error just before. I won't name any names, but that person knows who they are. They didn't apologise in the change room afterwards. Silly me did. The Millennium Stadium is the only place I've ever heard louder than those couple of occasions where in New Zealand matches only really have I heard it like the Millennium. The Millennium is outstanding.
I think people are kind of more saying that like the average atmosphere, obviously like when it's fever pitch, it's, England, France, All Blacks, it can be really good, but like for your standard game.
Does rugby really have that though?
I would say that's true of like any stadium really. Like is in any Six Nations team playing Italy in a home game, the atmosphere doesn't tend to really ratchet up a whole pile. Like I don't think the atmosphere is anywhere near as bad as Rudd definitely thinks it's, because we've discussed this before. Like I think it's not as bad as other people seem to think. Other people who go to these games seem to think the atmosphere is absolutely dreadful. I don't think it's that bad.
Do you know what I would say as well though? International rugby is probably, there just isn't that many. Sometimes you get good, like reasonably good traveling support, right? But like if your team is doing well, and Ireland have a very obviously a brilliant record, if they're kind of beating the opposition well, and there's only one team kind of like there's not as much stuff to cheer about, I don't think. You know what I mean? And as you say, that kind of tense bit that you need isn't there probably as well. Like there's tension for the big New Zealand games, I think, and for like South Africa and some of those other games, but it's probably just not there. And rugby is a very different spectator sport. Like there's kind of more stoppages with kind of scrums and different things like that. You know, line-outs, mauls. There's lots of, like, it's kind of a technical game to watch. It's kind of a bit slower than, say, football. It's kind of constant. Even if you think of Gaelic football, kind of constant hurling. Like, it's constant. And there's generally two teams. Like, you might have, it's probably not 50-50, but it might be like kind of 60-40, 70-30 at some of the games. So regardless, if one, like, there's always a bit of noise when one team's doing well, if you know what I mean. It doesn't really have that aspect to it, I don't think, particularly in internationals. Maybe I'm wrong on that. It's just an observation.
Jonathan, I also think that, like, if the atmosphere was so bad, would it not have like a more tangible impact on the team's results? Like, as I said, you know, under Andy Farrell, for instance, they've won 23 to 24 home games. The only defeat was to France during COVID with no spectators. So they actually haven't lost at home with spectators since that England game under Joe Schmidt, which is, you know, you're going back 5 years. Like, that's a stellar record. Would it not have more of a tangible impact if the atmosphere was so kind of bad, basically?
I don't know. Like, Luke could probably speak to it better than I could, obviously, having played. But I don't know. I think this Ireland team is so good and so much better than, so good and a good degree better than the teams that they're often playing, that I don't know how much it matters. And that's what I'm sort of saying about that. I think that the crowd senses that of when they do feel like they could be that extra 1%, then you do get the increased atmospheres that you get for those All Blacks games and England games, France games. You know, whenever it does sort of feel like it's really in the balance, I think you do get the atmosphere. I think what Rory's talking about, and I think what other people have sort of alluded to, is that there's a certain sense of a special Six Nations atmosphere that you get in Murrayfield and Cardiff and Paris that you don't get in Dublin for Six Nations games that aren't the big ones. And I think that's something that it is disappointing, almost, to what you say, the fact that this Ireland team that has such this amazing home record doesn't almost get the reception that it deserves when it plays at home. But, like, personally, I think genuinely that it comes down to the ticket prices. I think the ticket prices price out too big a slice of the population. I think you lose a lot not having, like, that sort of louder, as it was back in the day, schoolboy section. Like, the first Six Nations game I ever went to was like, and it must have been 24, 25 years ago now, but it was like in that schoolboy section, and the atmosphere in there was always great, I thought. But just with the way it's become, and this goes for a lot of things, the way it's become such an event and it's become a day out, and sort of like I said before, it doesn't feel in the main like it's a participatory thing. It's something that you're there to watch rather than be a part of, or, don't want to sound too old, but like there to take a picture of yourself there and put it on social media sort of thing. Like, it doesn't, certainly to me, doesn't feel like it would have done whenever I first started going to games. But I think part of that's just a change in the way people go to and experience events as well.
I'd suggest, though, as well, that it's not even, I don't even think those people can afford to go. Like, I don't think, you know, it's like, it's if there's two of you going to the game, it's 240 quid for decent tickets. Like, it's a punchy day out. Like, you know what I mean?
And that's if you're only going to the game. Like, if you're coming from down
that's what I mean. That's the tickets.
Hotel prices have been hiked up to the nth degree. Then the cost of the tickets is the least of your worries as well. It's
kind of like, it's the one you kind of bring your wife to, or your partner. I think like, it's become that kind of thing. Like, it's a nice atmosphere. It's not aggressive. You can drink during it. You know, it's like I agree. It's kind of a nice day out. Like, there's people, the drinking during the game is probably something that annoys the real purists, because there's people, you know, coming up and down, grabbing pints. You're standing up. You're up, and like, there's a bit of that side of it too. But that probably doesn't bring you would think the extra drink would bring a more raucous crowd, but it actually doesn't. Do you know what I mean?
It makes people sedate.
Yeah, it kind of just takes a little bit away from it, and it's more. I just don't think rugby outside of like Wales and maybe South Africa, and maybe, I suppose, New Zealand to a certain extent, but they watch it. They're really watching it. I think in New Zealand, they're like the technical. They don't want to be cheering during it. They really want to watch the technical aspects of the game. But like South Africa has a bit of that element. I think Wales a bit of that element where you kind of could have like the kind of common folk in there as well. Do you know, the kind of way where you'd have people like there's tickets go out to the clubs. People can get it through the clubs. Like, real rugby supporters can kind of go to it. It's not just people. It's not just a kind of like 120 quid a ticket does rule out people who are really like proper rugby supporters who are going down to their club week in, week out. I think anyway, I might be wrong on that.
Like, the Aviva Stadium is 15,000 smaller than the second smallest stadium, which is Murrayfield, in the tournament. Like, so having such a reduced capacity compared to the other nations, like we saw at the World Cup, the appetite is definitely there for more people. So like,
only in Ireland could you have one section of the stadium
one tiny little stand
with 10 rows of seats.
But think about if you have 15,000 more tickets that you could sell. Now, I do find it, I don't think it would be like cheaper tickets for clubs. I think it would just be more corporate tickets sold, to be honest. I don't actually think this would solve the problem.
15,000 more per game. I don't think
I think it would be all corporate. I really do. I honestly think it would be hoovered up with really high ticket prices. I don't think it actually would, because someone said this to me today when we were having this conversation, if the stadium was bigger, we could sell more cheaper tickets or get more different kind of
surely
crowds.
they could get... So you could have a schoolboy section then, no?
You could, you could.
You don't think so?
You wouldn't. I don't think they would, no.
Really?
It's just so many people out there who are willing to pay the money, clearly.
It's the craziest stadium design of all time. Like, it's the silliest... I genuinely... Only in Ireland could you have that. I find it depressing to look at. Every time I look at that, I'm like, what? Like, who okayed that? Like, who didn't shell out whatever it is? Like, I have family living behind, kind of like my father's family, and they would have bitten your hand off for a good price for that. Like, it absolutely insanity to not move the stadium back or move it back the other way. It
just seems like a missed opportunity when we know the appetite to only have, like, the idea that Ireland's stadium is 15,000 smaller than Scotland's, and the appetite we have for rugby here now is just... It is a massive missed opportunity. And the other thing I wanted to say, just you mentioned the New Zealand supporters there, because I remember Keane, who was over there, covering it, was taken aback at the atmosphere at the Ireland tests when the game was really in the balance and it was really dramatic. He said it was pretty sedate there as well. So maybe it's not just...
Well, I think they're really watching the game, and I think because it's, as I said, it's a very technical game with lots of stuff going on. Like, there's loads of there's a big cohort of the stadium that'll be like, a reasonable size thing, looking at the scrums, look what's happening there, looking at lineouts, thinking, there's lots to watch and kind of... You're not like it's. Whereas I think in football, because it's kind of, there's like big build-ups. Like when there's kind of a build-up in play, there's not a massive amount to really cheer, but fans will be up kind of cheering to get the atmosphere going for their team. Like, the only time you really think about it, like there's what is there in most games? There are probably 3 goals in most games. Like, in 3 scoring opportunities, probably 3 scores, in a game where the crowd goes absolutely wild. But like, for the most part, like the soccer supporters, they're just different to rugby supporters. You know what I mean? And there's probably less to really cheer in the build-up play, but they make the atmosphere. I think they're conscious of it being in a big event and making it an event. Whereas rugby, I think, is just a little bit different in that sense.
So the question I asked Jonathan about, like, why doesn't the lack of an atmosphere have a more tangible impact on the team, given their record is so strong? You've obviously played in the Aviva, you've played for Ireland in great atmospheres and probably atmospheres that weren't great. Like, how big of an impact does it have?
I don't know if it has a big impact. Like, if you think of Edinburgh all those years, remember Edinburgh were quite a difficult team to go ahead and beat. Like, you might have a way better team than them. Now, they were pretty good, but not that good. And you'd never lose them at home. You'd whoop them at home, but you might lose the odd game over at Edinburgh when it was kind of cavernous type atmosphere in Murrayfield with like 5,000 people going to the game and like echoes around it. The kind of, I can't think of another word, but the dearth of kind of atmosphere made it a tricky place to go and play. You just weren't kind of used to it. So sometimes the familiarity can play to your advantage, even if there's not like a really kind of buzzing or kind of tense atmosphere in a stadium. Do you know, like, I always felt it worked to Edinburgh's advantage that they were kind of more used to that. Not that Ireland are playing in like that kind of environment.
People, that's what people are saying. People are saying it's like a library. It's like,
there's a little bit of that. But I think if you're going to like GAA or hurling games, you might compare it to that. Like, obviously you can't compare it to soccer. Like, football's just different level of atmosphere, and people are spending every cent they have to go to some of those games, like the fanatics. Do you know what I mean? Whereas you won't have that cohort at rugby games, I don't think. So, it's very difficult to compare it. I think it can play to your advantage, the familiarity in a stadium anyway. You're at home. They've got a really good setup in Carton House, in the Shelburne. They have a nice kind of build up. They know the stadium really well. I still think there's a good atmosphere at the crucial times in the big games, which is what really matters. And Jonathan's point about them being quite a bit better than some of the other opposition that they faced there is probably a key point too. There's never really much of a concern over the last couple of years against Italy, against Wales, generally against Scotland. They've beaten them pretty well. It's only the Wales, England, New Zealand, South Africa games that you kind of be concerned. And I think the atmosphere is good in those ones.
Yeah, well, as I said, 50 wins out of 55. Like, it's such a ridiculous record written down. I'm now kind of somewhat worried I wrote it down wrong from earlier.
Just when Gatlin rolls into town.
But I don't know, but I think I've gotten that right. Anyway, and I think it's 23 wins out of 24 for Andy Farrell at home since he took charge, which is phenomenal. Jonathan, the other kind of big game of the weekend, Scotland-England, could have obviously title implications depending on how things shake out over the next few weeks. How do you see that one going? Like, I feel like there's, the English are calling back, I think, Manu Tuilagi, Ollie Lawrence, a few other guys available. But I think Scotland at home might have too much for them. But what's your view on that one?
I think the most sort of interesting element of it is how the English defence is going to grow under Felix Jones game to game, because it has looked, I think there's been signs there that they're really taking on board what he's been bringing. And I think they're going to get better at that through the tournament. Scotland, whatever you want to say about them, their attack is still good. Like, they do still have one of the better attacks in this competition. So it's just going to be who gets the edge there. I think is going to be the key. I would agree with you. I would see Scotland just edging it, I think, and which obviously knocks the English Grand Slam off course, and we just leave Ireland as the only one chasing it.
Yeah, because if England do get a win, it sets up that game, presuming Ireland beat Wales. That game up in Twickenham to be unbelievable atmosphere for that. But do you think England will go to Murrayfield and win?
I don't think so. No, I think Scotland will have a little bit too much for them. I just don't really rate the English team that highly at the moment. I think they could be difficult to beat at home, but I don't think away from home that they'll have the. I just don't think they'll trouble Scotland enough. I think Scotland will have I think Jonathan's completely right. I think their attack is probably. Maybe not second best. Maybe it is second best. It's very close with France. Probably second best in the competition. Very close with France. I think when France are fizzing, and if they had full complement with Dupont and Ntamak, they might be a very different kettle of fish. I think they would be. Sorry, absolutely. But at the moment, they don't look. They're kind of a bit disjointed. They don't look. They have the danger men, but they just don't look as cohesive going forward. Scotland look more cohesive. Finn Russell's playing well. That's a dangerous centre partnership that they have, and they have the finishers out wide. I mean, whatever about Van der Merwe's kind of frailties in defence, like, he certainly doesn't have them in attack. Like, he's a bloody hard man to take down, and he's in open field, he's really, really dangerous. So if their pack get kind of anything close to parity, which you probably expect them to do at home, dangerous assumption to make with this Scotland team over the last couple of years. They seem to be way better in that kind of underdog type mentality, but they won't be this weekend. I think they'll be tipped to win it. I think they should win it. And I don't see it by a landslide. I agree with as well. Jeez, I keep agreeing. I'll have to disagree with you on something, Jonathan, but I think
wait until the Ulster game and maybe.
I just think the defensive stuff is. I think they will continue to get better at that over the competition. I still think there's too many large portions of the game where they're kind of falling off, and you have to be so accurate in that kind of defensive system that Felix Jones is trying to implement there. They don't have enough of that as of yet. And I think kind of new bodies in might not actually help that. They might make it a little bit more difficult to kind of get up and running. Like, you think of Tuilagi coming in, that's a key role that he plays in a key position for any defensive system. So it might be difficult for him to get up to speed straight away. So I think they will continue to improve, but not enough time. And I think, it might make for. Look, it'll be a bounce back for them at home. Still a great atmosphere, but not the fizzing one that we're hoping, if they do get the win on the weekend, that we expect with the Ireland game. Yeah,
just looking like, Gregor Townsend's record against England is actually really strong. Like, they've won the last 3 Six Nations games against England. He's won 4 out of the 6 with 1 draw.
I was going to say the draw as well.
Yeah, with the draw. So he's actually only lost once to England. Like, to beat England 3 times in a row as a Scotland head coach is actually like a major, feather in his cap. Obviously, to be going 4 in a row at home where they're favourites. Now, they were 0-8 against Ireland under Gregor Townsend. That's the big one where, like, his record against France is pretty good as head coach as well. The Irish record is just abysmal, but England, they really have had their number over the last couple of years, so that'll be an interesting one. Just to go back to Ireland, Jonathan, actually, because there's one thing I did want to ask you. I kind of forgot before I went on to the Scotland game. What kind of team do you want to see picked this weekend? Do you expect it to kind of revert en masse to that team that played France? Gary Ringrose is available as well, obviously, now, which he wasn't for the first 2 weeks.
That's the big call, because I think it hasn't really been talked about that much, but I think Henshaw has been brilliant in this championship, coming back into the side. And if Ringrose is back, how much credit does Ringrose have in the bank? Obviously, Aki as well had a knock as well. So I think that's the big call. It almost feels like, we had this debate an awful lot, say 3 years ago, but the 3 of them never seemed to be fit at the same time. And it almost feels like we're getting back to that, because I just think it would be massively harsh on Henshaw to drop out at this stage. But I think Farrell has obviously more often than not gone with that partnership of Aki and Ringrose and being rewarded with it. So I think that's a huge call, I think, and that's probably the one that I think I'm most interested to see whenever the team is named on Thursday.
I think it should be Bundy Aki and Robbie Henshaw with Ringrose on the bench.
I thought you were going to say something different. 100% agree with you.
Yeah, because I just think, as Jonathan said, I think Robbie Henshaw's been the best rugby he's played. You know, not to be fair, he's an unbelievable player and plays great rugby generally, but I think he's in a real rich vein of form as well. And Bundy Aki has looked as good as he did at the World Cup. I just think, and they have I think going back to their Connacht days, as a duo, as a partnership, they have real good chemistry as well that manifests itself on the pitch too. Obviously, everyone knows how good Gary Ringrose is, but he's been injured. He missed 2 weeks. I don't think he deserves to just walk back into the team, even though his pedigree is stellar. Have him on the bench this weekend, and then obviously if he comes on and plays really well, Twickenham can be another debate. But I think for this weekend, I think it has to be Bundy Aki and Robbie Henshaw.
Yeah, and he gives you lots of options, you know, because like to be honest with you, if I was picking a team with just Keenan out, you know, Henshaw slotting in on the right wing would be ideal, but the problem for them is that Hansen isn't there, so he couldn't go back to fullback, and you'd be switching too many around. I think what you would ideally do is, if you're picking from, say, Hansen's fit, I think you might put Ringrose on the right wing, keep Henshaw on 13, put Mac Hansen at fullback, and keep Lowe there. But if what I would do personally is, if it wasn't for the foot, like, so you obviously want to have Ringrose, obviously is a right-footed player, but you really don't want to have him on the left wing because it just reduces down your options. It's not the end of the world. You can still play the position without being left-footed, but it's just not ideal. I think I'd have Lowe. If I was picking my best complement or my best team, I'd have Ringrose on the left wing and I'd put Lowe back to fullback, would be what I do, because I just think Henshaw deserves to stay in the position. I do agree they have a nice chemistry and he's playing brilliantly and he's so physical. He really suits Ireland's play. So I'd be moving Ringrose to one of the wings ideally with Hansen and Keenan out. So yeah, that's what I would do if he had the left foot, but he doesn't. So I think on that basis, I think he's probably right. But leaving him on the bench does give you more options, I think. And you could probably go with a 6-2 split if you wanted. You'd be pushing it, but it's certainly an interesting call. Ringrose definitely is the more natural at 13. I think obviously, you know, probably not helping him. We wouldn't even be discussing this if Nienaber hadn't moved him to the wing, but he is brilliant there and has, you know, he's got the pace, he's got the fitness, he's got the kicking game. He's great under the high balls, extremely brave. So he could be a great winger too. So I don't know. It's a real conundrum for the coach, I think. My sense is that knowing Farrell just a little bit from his previous selections, we're all watching, and I think everyone's of the same opinion. He'll probably stick with Henshaw, I think, won't he? Is everyone kind of like just based on observing him over the last couple of years? Even though Ringrose is definitely a more natural 13, you know, he plays there all the time.
You're picking between unbelievable players as well.
Nice problem to have.
Yeah, it's a great problem.
Yeah, it is.
Jonathan, like, will they go 6-2 split? Do you think? Because, you know, if Frawley is full back and like Jack Crowley's obviously starting out half, like I don't see the point in putting Harry Byrne on the bench as well, and maybe you can go with just a scrum half plus Gary Ringrose maybe, and then it allows you to have Ryan Baird and Jack Conan, because otherwise it looks like Ryan Baird potentially might be squeezed out of the 23, even though he's been playing, I think, really well. What's your view on that? For me, it just makes no sense to have 3 out halves in the 23.
Yeah, it just depends, I suppose, on the knock suffered by Keelan Doris. I know obviously he was pictured not training today, and Simon Easterby has sort of said that
they claimed he's fit, so I'm just going off that.
Yeah.
Well, let's assume he's fit.
Let's assume he's fit for this.
Yeah, if he's fit, I would go 6-2 to get just a greater percentage of your better players in, I think. If he's not, then obviously I think you're looking at Jack Conan starting at number 8 and the trickle down there being that Baird's your soulless forward on the bench. But no, I would agree. I think you have that flexibility that Frawley gives you. And, you know, we saw it in the Italy game as well, even with Carley going to 15. So,
can I throw a curveball? Would you any thoughts on having? See, I thought McCluskey was brilliant against Italy. Would you go with, if you went with the 5-3? Would you go McCluskey and Ringrose on the bench? Just because I'm purely thinking getting your best players in there and being able to, like, it's such an attritional position in the centres. You'd love to be able to take off whoever has the better, more kind of physical game, either a Key or Henshaw. Pretty hard to pick generally, but say one of them does have it, you have the option to take the two of them off, or if you could take one of them off and put Ringrose into the backfield somewhere to slot in, or and you still have.
Then you're probably leaving Ryan Baird out for McCluskey.
No, that's the point I'm making. You do say you wanted to keep that 5-3 and have that little bit of optionality in case there's an extra injury in the backs, and you're apprehensive about having a 6-2 split. Would you have McCluskey in there, given that you've got Frawley in the team? What do you think?
It's an interesting one because I actually do think McCluskey played really well against Italy.
All of a sudden, you're really
Four
beefy.
centres in the 23. It doesn't make any sense to me.
No, but so Ringrose gives you the optionality, and you still have two out halves.
Yeah.
Because
that seems like a Rassie Erasmus kind of selection where he's
I don't know. I just thought I'd put it out there because it occurred to me as you were talking. I was like, well, what would you, if you're thinking about being really physical at home, which I think is going to be the key against any Gatland team, you got to be really, really physical. 6-2 is the obvious one because we've got so much quality there. Like a Lion, like you never want to be leaving him out. You've got obviously Baird playing great rugby, and he just gives you your line out solid, your scrum is solid. You're so good around the pitch. That's the obvious one for me. But if you went the other way and you said, you know what, I just want to have three backs, would you pick McCluskey and go, you come off the bench for 20 minutes and just bulldoze everything in front of you? And you've still got Ringrose who covers your backfield but can also give you the little bit of, I don't know, that bit of X factor that Ringrose does have with the footwork and the pace. Just a thought. I don't know.
Come in on that, Jonathan?
Yeah, I'd never actually thought about it, to be honest. It is interesting, but Farrell's obviously shown throughout his tenure something that an awful lot of international coaches aren't really willing to do, in having one centre on the bench. I'm sort of trying to rack my brain if I've ever seen two centres on the bench. Quite possible. Now, I suppose in that instance, then you're really saying Ringrose is on the bench as a
utility. He's the utility guy. Yeah.
Yeah, as the back three. But I suppose what your problem would be there is, if Frawley gets injured, then what do you do? Well, I suppose who goes to fullback if Frawley gets injured?
Well, if Frawley and Crowley gets injured, like it's hard to manage against that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
I mean, you could say that for any game.
Exactly. Yeah.
Injured,
You're goosed. There's only so many. There's only so many utility guys you can have.
It's just giving me real Springboks to the World Cup vibes. I'm just not like I'm not into it. I'm not into it. It's giving me the selection ick. I think
But if you consider him as a viable back three option, which I do consider him as a viable back three option. Ringrose. Yeah. Then it's not really it's two centres who play there regularly, but it's also a guy who
a centre and a winger.
A centre and a winger, yeah.
Well, I certainly don't think there's any point in having Harry Byrne there with two out half stages.
It seems overkill to me.
Like, there's no suggestion at the moment that would be the case, but I just looking at it, I think I would go 6-2. I just don't want to see Ryan Baird edged out because he's unlucky in the fact that he's basically competing against the captain for a spot in the starting team.
Yeah.
Like if Peter O'Mahony wasn't the captain, Ryan Baird would have a much better chance of being in the 23 as it is. I don't unless they go 6-2, I don't think
your captain's not going to be sitting on the bench.
Yeah, exactly.
I think like the sort of the devil's advocate argument of this is that if Frawley gets injured, Crawley goes to 10 and Crawley goes to 15 and Harry Byrne comes on and plays 10. I think that's probably the eventuality where you want Harry Byrne on the bench. But
yeah,
maybe it's not as. Yeah, to be fair, that
does make sense.
That does make sense,
and that's what they have done. Like Crowley has gone back there, so
yeah,
they're comfortable doing that, and it's very much a like for like with Frawley. Okay. They're very similar players.
We'll finish up now with the left wing moment of the week in association with Bank of Ireland because we want to touch on some of the provincial action, chiefly the Ulster game, and I know Luke's moment is related to that. But first, I want to give mine. I think the Irish team welcomed in Stevie Mulrooney, who sung the Ireland's Call at the Italy game. Probably the best bit of the atmosphere of the game, to be fair. It was a great rendition. And then they had, his name, Dara, his surname escapes me, but the fan from Monaghan who came in, he was also over with the Liverpool team a short while ago.
I saw that, yeah. So he's talking to Paulie, was he?
Yeah. And Buddy Yaki's favourite player. That's just great scenes, and it's great, like the players, obviously, busy time of year, Six Nations, but to take the time out to bring two kids in kind of make their dreams come true, I thought was just brilliant. And I think you can find those clips on the RFU Twitter. It was really good. And the other moment of the week, completely different, was Ronan O'Gara after.
Are we allowed? How many are we allowed to have all these?
Two.
Well,
I have two. That was one moment. That was one moment. That was one moment. It was an umbrella moment.
Oh, your wholesome moment, and then your rugby moment.
My rugby moment was Ronan O'Gara saying after La Rochelle's defeat to Lyon at the weekend when they lost a big lead that he knew it was coming during the week because the players were more focused on property prices in Ile de Ré and La Rochelle than on the game. He had a proper cut of them. A classic kind of French rugby, top 14 kind of taking the players to task. It'll be interesting to see how they respond this weekend because by their standards, their season has been a little bit patchy and he didn't spare any prisoners at the weekend. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of bounce back he gets from that. Jonathan, I'll go to you next. Or I don't know what your moment is. Maybe I should go. Actually, I'll go to Luke first.
Don't let him take my moment. Although I feel like this probably won't be a joyful one for Jonathan particularly. It's the Dan Edwards drop goal to win the match. I mean, obviously in contentious enough circumstances based on Dan McFarlane's interview post game.
Ospreys beating Ulster.
Ospreys beating Ulster. Sorry, yeah. So it was a brilliant piece of skill under pressure. Breaking Ulster hearts, and obviously, as I said, there was some kind of contentious stuff after the game about some decisions that happened throughout the game, but doesn't bode well for McFarlane. I'm a little bit worried about him. I think I can sense kind of some of the bigger voices, kind of the little bit of disenchantment with what's going on up there. Jonathan will be able to speak obviously more closely to that, but I'm worried now. I think he's been there quite a while. Don't know if the project has moved on as much as as much as they'd want. I was going to say should have, but I feel like he's been pretty unlucky throughout his, different like kind of key players injured throughout the, you think of Addison now. Is Addison heading back to Sale? There's kind of a few things like that where you're kind of going, he was a key player for them. Vermeulen was, he was good at different points, but kind of injured for parts of it. He's that kind of key guys that I feel a little bit for him, but the project hasn't moved on, I don't think. And it's probably coming to crunch time now this season, I think. If things don't go well, I can sense some of the mood music around Ulster not good for him. So kind of watching that space closely. They might rally late in the season, but I can't see it at this point.
Just on the Dan Edwards drop goal, I didn't see the game live, so I was watching back the replay. Serious skill to get that. There was guys in his face, the hands up. That was one of the better drop goals you'll see because he was under a lot of pressure. Jonathan, before we get your moment, just on Ulster, because as I said, I was watching back the highlights, and if you'd freeze the game just before Jake Flannery throws that intercept, with Ulster 14-9 up, men queuing up for the try that would have sealed the victory. And if you'd freeze it then, you would have thought for all money they were going to get away with a vital away win. As it stands, we know they didn't. The drop goal breaking their hearts. And to Luke's kind of talk about Dan McFarlane, it does feel like this is kind of coming towards the end of the road. The last couple of results have been really poor. That New Year's Day victory over Leinster feels 2 seasons ago, let alone 2 months ago, or not even. What's your perspective on things in that regard?
I just think that, the league table says a lot. They're sat in 8th. They're in the ERC playoff positions by virtue of games won. They've lost 6 of their last 9. But moreover, they've lost 16 of their last 31. You can go back to the start of December 2022. Since the start of that month, they've lost more games than they've won. So they've been a bad team, really. Let's not sugarcoat it. They've been a bad team for 14 months. And they've got too much talent to be getting results that are that bad over that long a stretch. So it's not a short-term thing. And I think whenever they have results like that Leinster result that you mentioned, or you want to go back to the Racing result, or even this time last year when we were sort of having similar conversations, and then they reeled off 5 league wins in a row. The blips are getting longer and the high points are getting more isolated. So it's just not a good picture, basically, at the minute. Luke sort of spoke about talk about players leaving. Obviously, that's all related to the need to trim the wage bill, because even in relation to the other provinces, they're overspending, or they have been overspending, and that obviously has to come to an end as well. So it's not doesn't seem like a particularly great place to be. It's hard to see where the improvement is going to come in the short term, unless quite literally 10 players find form again that they haven't been able to find over the last 18 months all of a sudden. And it's really, making the playoffs is important, but the loss of prestige that they would suffer from missing out on the top eight and therefore missing out on the Champions Cup next season, and essentially going what would then be a minimum of a year and a half without playing a top tier European game, I think would be massive. And I think at that point, you would see just not even anger. I think you would see apathy, which is even worse, because you would end up losing revenue, whether it be through ticket sales, whether it be through sponsorship, commercial, that you need, because it's hard to remember a time when Ulster's balance sheet has looked consistently worse than it does now. And that's something that they need to rectify before they even think about anything else. So,
Jonathan, I suppose that cancelled game against La Rochelle has just become an absolute killer. Like, not being able to get that game on and get that full house in Kingspan that they would have gotten financially was a disaster.
Yeah, but like a lot of people are pointing that, and you're right. Well, but like that's 450 grand, right? Last season, that doesn't explain why they're still going to be posting a loss this season, and why the projections for the year after that are bad as well. I think that was a massive, massive mess up, right? But it was isolated to 1 year. Like the financial reports, whether it be through money lost through COVID, whether it be the fact that they have less home games in the ERC than they once had, whether they had less home games in the Champions Cup that they once had. These are all factors, and they are all things that Ulster can point to. But also at the end of the day, the other provinces are having to deal with these as well, and they're not on target to post the losses that Ulster are on target to lose. So, like, getting the house in order first and foremost has to be the priority. And then you start wondering about what sort of squad you're left with when you've cut the wage bill to the point that you're going to have to cut it. And as I said before, it's just like an awful lot of players need to find form that they were showing 2 years ago, because there gets to a point where players have been off form for so long that old sort of adage about form is temporary, class is permanent. People are going to start doubting that, because if you're off form for as long as you've been, there is no guarantee that you're going to get back to the level you were at 2 years ago.
There comes a point where you're not that player. You know what I mean?
And there comes a point where you're not that team.
Yeah.
Like Ulster are consistently saying they're a better team than their results show, but they've been this team for 14 months now.
Yeah, they remind me a lot of United. They're really inconsistent, I think, and must be tough for the supporters. You know what I mean? Just when you're trying to bank on them having a big performance, they kind of let you down, And look, there's been some bad luck along the way. There always is in these kind of runs. But I don't know. I sometimes feel like rugby, particularly a change at the top, can really make a difference. I'm not calling for that yet. I do rate Dan McFarlane, but I just wonder, like, is there someone that you could find? Is there a Joe Schmidt? Is there someone that could just re-energize the place? I still think that there's good players up there. I'm not suggesting that. I know I've made the suggestion that, are you still a good player if you've played badly for this long? Or are you just a very inconsistent player? I still feel like there's enough quality up there that I've seen that if everyone was pulling in the right direction and doing the right things, and there was a confidence and a swagger about them week to week, you would see the consistency and you'd see what those players truly are. Whereas at the moment, I just don't know. I don't have a feel good. There's not that feel good factor. I'm not feeling around Ulster. I'm feeling like it's a bit flat up there, and as you say, like, it becomes a bit self-perpetuating, those kind of cycles. Like one thing begets the other. The results don't come that way, as Jonathan called it, that apathy that amongst supporters. That's really, really dangerous. You get people not showing up, and all of a sudden you can't afford to get your kits off. So you can't afford to get these. You can't afford to keep Henderson. These kind of things start happening, and it's very hard to find a way out. But I think someone at the top in rugby can change those things. So that will be interesting to see if they're considering that.
It'll be interesting to see. I know he won't directly be responsible for Ulster, but David Humphreys obviously coming into that new Safor role. Like, no one is more steeped in Ulster. What influence he could have in terms of maybe getting players up there, or maybe any improvements. And there were also victories for Leinster, Connacht and Munster, and great to see RG Snyman finally make his return for Munster. Could have a big end of the season. But we'll finish up, Jonathan. You can give it on a more positive note now after that. Sorry to put you through it. You can give us your moment of the week.
Yeah, there was never any danger of me stealing Luke's moment of the week, to be fair enough. I'm gonna go back to the top 14 and just the 4 tries scored by Paul Gray for Toulouse against Oyonnax. Obviously, everybody's speaking about Antoine Dupont and his departure to sevens and what that would mean for Toulouse. man that takes his shirt first up scores 4 tries. So I thought that was great.
Yeah, well, fair play to him. I doubt it'll be holding onto the jersey for the rest of the season, but it's not a bad start. On that note, I'd like to thank Luke and Jonathan for joining me on tonight's episode of the Left Wing Podcast. We'll be back later in the week with another show reacting to the Ireland team announcement. In the meantime, you can subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or listen on independent.ie. So until next time, thanks for listening and goodbye.